Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where today's video is going to be about yet another rare Yashica camera. I've done a few Yashica videos in over the last month or so, some really interesting cameras, and there seems to be a lot of interest in Yashica, especially the more unusual models, so I thought I'd do a video about this particular camera, which has been sitting in my toolbox for 2 or 3 years now. This is the Yashica Pentamatic 2, which was introduced by Yashica in 1960. Now, Yashica has always been very famous as a maker of rangefinder cameras. They produced 8 million of their Electro 35 cameras and a variety of other cameras, half-frame cameras, 8mm movie cameras, and a number of SLR cameras as well. The Pentamatic series was Yashica's first attempt to make an SLR camera. And it was kind of an interesting story about these. Yashica didn't have the same history in photography that other major Japanese, camera makers had. Yashica, before the 1950s, was a maker of, medical and microscope type equipment and had not really been in the photography business. And they got into the photography business in the 1950s with their twin-lens reflex cameras, and then they began manufacturing their own rangefinder cameras. They acquired the Nikka camera company, which expanded their line, and then they eventually decided to create their own line of SLR cameras, and the Pentamatic was the first attempt. If you look at the other makers of SLR cameras at the time in Japan, the major makers were, of course, Pentax, Nikon, and Canon, as well as Minolta, though Minolta jumped in a little bit later than these guys. In the case of Canon and Nikon, their SLR cameras were closely based on existing rangefinder designs. In the case of the Nikon F, the F was basically a Nikon, later model Nikon rangefinder, like an S3 or SP, which just had a mirror box and pentaprism attached to it, but was otherwise the same camera, and many of the parts actually interchanged between, say, the Nikon S3 and the Nikon F. In the case of the Canon cameras, the early Canon Flex models, you'll notice that a lot of these are very similar to the Canon 7 rangefinder camera. When Yashica began producing their first SLR camera, they didn't really base it upon an existing design. They kind of started from the ground up, and the result of this, this project was the Pentamatic series. And that was a rather sophisticated and very expensive 35mm SLR system with a small number of lenses designed to fit it, and with a unique lens mount, with a Pentamatic lens mount. This is unique to these cameras, and it's not interchangeable with the later, say, the Contax Yashica, the CY mount, and of course not interchangeable with the later Yashica SLR cameras, which use the M42 mount. It's a really interesting, attempt to make a popular SLR camera, but unfortunately in Yashica's case it just kind of fell on its face. The inspiration for the design of this camera was the Zunao camera, which was the granddaddy of Japanese SLR cameras. They were produced in very limited numbers and are extremely expensive today. And a decent one will set you back around 2 million yen or more, depending on the condition. A really junky one that doesn't work will cost 1 million yen. 1 million yen is about $10,000. The Zunao company is it's an oddball name and company here in Japan, ZUNOW. They were mainly a producer of lenses, and they produced some very beautiful lenses, fast lenses, f1.5, f1.4, and even f1.1 lenses in the Nikon S mount and in the Leica L mount, as well as cinema lenses, and they even produced this particular lens, this Yashinon 58mm f1.7 lens. Today, the Zunao name is more popular or more well known as a bicycle manufacturer, and they produce, frame sets for the Keirin track racing bikes here in Japan, and also like a custom maker of road and touring bike frames. But anything which has the name Zunao and attached to it here in Japan, especially photography related, gets kind of a premium price. a lot of different manufacturers used zoom out lenses, Nyoka, Yashica, and other makers, and the ones which actually say zoom out on them, they get a lot of money. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the features, controls, and functions of this camera, and we're going to go ahead and start at the top here. And the most unique function which you first notice on this camera is the flash shoe mounted over here on this side, and integral with the flash shoe is the rewind knob to rewind the film. It kind of tucks down inside and is hidden from view. And for some reason, it was popular in those days to have, I guess, a pro level camera with the flash not attached over the top or center or whatever. Old rangefinder cameras tended to have the flash in odd locations. The Nikon and Canon cameras, of course, remove the flash shoe to the one side because they had interchangeable prisms or removable prisms, so you couldn't put the flash on top of the prism if the prism came off. Yashica decided to go ahead and put this camera on the side, maybe not for any professional benefit, but maybe it at least looked like a professional camera when compared to others on the market. The rewind knob fits kind of flush in the top here, and to open it, you have to go back to this three-way switch here. We have a three-way switch which says A, R, and O. A is where you switch it for the normal operation of the camera, and you'll see this setting on things like the Nikon F and rangefinder cameras, old Canons and stuff like that, and similar other SLR cameras which have this kind of system, though none of them have this kind of rewind system. When the lever is pointed up to the A position, the camera is in operating condition, and in using user condition. Anyway, that's where you set it to operate the camera. We have an R section here, and when you push it to the R section, that releases the film rewind knob and it pops up. To open the film door, you push it down to the O section and then pull up on the knob, and the film door opens. And to rewind the film, you have to go back to the R setting and then push in the rewind button on the bottom, and then you can rewind the film. And then when you're done, you just tuck it back into place, or push it to the A and tuck it back into place, and it stays in the downward position. Perhaps one of the reasons why they didn't put the shoe on the top of the camera or use some kind of adapter is because this was the Pentamatic camera, and the Penta design was kind of what set this camera apart from the rangefinder cameras of the time. The lines on this camera on the prism are very much similar to the old Zunao camera, and with the strong lines which you see in cameras like the Nikon F or the old Canon F1, and even things like the Petri prism. And if you put this on top, I guess it kind of gets rid of the Pentamatic-ish kind of appearance of the camera. So maybe that's another reason why they moved it to the side. On the right side here, we have the shutter speed dial, which is arranged in the normal layout from B and 1 second up to 1/1000th of a second. And it has a separate setting here for the flash sync speed. It has a red X denoting where to set it for the flash. And there's also another red X over here. If you are using a flash gun on this camera, you just slide it on and plug it into one of these two sockets. If you're using the 1/30th flash sync speed, you simply use these two settings, and if you're using, I guess, the rear curtain or whatever shutter, you would plug it into the upper socket. On the right here, we have the shutter charging lever, film winding lever, and we have a switch on the top to let you know what kind of film you have loaded in the camera. Not the film speed, but say if it's a 12 or 24 or 36 exposure roll of film, you would switch it from one to the other. It doesn't make any difference where it's set. For the most part, I only shoot 36 exposure film, so I would know I would have 36 exposures in the camera, so this isn't really relevant. In front of this, we have the film counter dial, and kind of like the old Canon L series rangefinder cameras, you have to reset it manually by turning this dial. You can hear it turning on the side. We have a strap plug on this side, and we don't have one on this side. So the strap plug kind of disappeared. Who knows when? It came without it when I got the camera. I can probably adapt another strap plug to fit it, one from like a later Yashica or something. These are kind of, the strap plugs aren't so difficult to find, and they're just kind of screwed in on the inside. The back of the camera, we have the viewfinder. It's a nice large viewfinder eyepiece here, very good for people who wear eyeglasses. It's larger than what I see in some other SLR cameras from this era. It's dovetailed on the side, so you can adapt a rubber eye cup to fit it, or you can also adapt, say, diopter lenses. You could probably use the later diopters off, say, Olympus or Pentax. It's close to the same size. You can kind of file it to make it fit. On the bottom here, we have the reminder dial for setting the film speed, or reminding yourself of the film speed. Like on other old cameras, this is just a reminder. It has nothing to do with the operation of the camera. Back when this camera was made, there wasn't really a standardized film box system, which came along later, mainly to make, I guess, the transport, sales, and stocking and processing of film easier. You know, if you had a small film store, kiosk, or something like that, it made it very convenient if all the film boxes were the same size and you could put them all together and use kind of standard shelves, and it made it much easier. Back in the 1950s, that wasn't standard yet. Film came in plastic tubes, it came in aluminum canisters, it came in a variety of different ways. So later on, when it became standardized, cameras added a card holder, and you could rip the top off of any of these old film cartons and it would slide neatly into the card holder. And these days they didn't have that, so to remind yourself what film you had loaded in the camera, you would simply program. And you have a couple of dials here where you can switch from color to black and white, and also the film speed with the outer dial. The bottom of the camera, I already mentioned the rewind switch on the bottom. We also have a standard 1/4-inch tripod socket. On the front of the camera, we have the shutter release button located on the front, like it is on some of the later M42 mount Yashica SLR cameras. Yashica, Petri, and a few other makers decided that this would be a better location for the shutter release button, and the logic being that if you put it on the front at a 45-degree angle, pointing more or less toward the center of the camera, that when you pushed the shutter button, it required less motion and was less likely to cause any blur than if you put it on the top of the camera. That may be true. Technology was fairly advanced when it came to stuff like that in the 50s, but nowadays, today, we seem to put it all, always put them on the top. This release button is threaded for a standard cable release. On the bottom here, we have the release button for the lens. This one doesn't need the button. It kind of comes off by itself. The problem with these cameras, especially a bayonet lens mount camera in the late 1950s, when you'd never built one before, it was kind of hard to get the design exactly right, and we can see that this design isn't exactly right because it's too easy to take off the lens without pushing the button. And that's especially a problem in these old lenses when the focus gets stiff like this one is, and the aperture is especially stiff. When I try to turn the aperture ring, the lens just comes all the way off the camera. We have a couple of odd controls on the front here which make this camera different from other ones. We have, I guess, a preview lever here for the aperture, and a locking lever also for the aperture blades. You can kind of stop them down, and it's kind of an odd thing which was obsolete even before they decided to design it, let alone manufacture it. And I guess that's why this camera was on the market for only a few months, and it was discontinued after only a few hundred were sold. Other makers, you could use the normal like M42 system, or the automatic systems which were found on Nikon and other cameras, much better than the one which came on the Yashica camera. However, the one strong point to this camera is this lens. Despite its the odd bayonet mount and the odd controls on it, this is a Zunau lens, and Zunau, they did one thing very well in those days, and they made very high quality lenses, and this is an example of one of those very high quality lenses. This is a 58mm f1.7 lens, and what's unique about this compared to other ones is its 10-blade aperture design. So back in around this time when Nikon was producing its SLR cameras, their early lenses in the F mount came with a 9-bladed aperture, which was about the most that Nikon could fit in the camera. And then they decided that that was a little bit too expensive and too difficult to manufacture, so they changed design and they introduced a 5-bladed system. And that is what you find on almost all of modern old SLR camera lenses. The fewer lenses mean less complication, less friction, and the ability for the camera to shoot at higher speeds with a motor drive and whatever. The advantage to having more blades in the aperture system is being able to make, I guess, a more round aperture. and this improves the quality of the out of focus highlights, or what they call bokeh. And that is one of the special things about this particular lens. But this lens, because it does have the tin aperture blade design, the aperture ring, these ones have a little bit of oil on it, and it's a little bit difficult for me to turn the aperture ring on this camera. It's quite stiff, so it's that's one of the weaknesses of the design. So you have to make sure that if you get one of these lenses, that it turns freely. If it doesn't turn freely, don't try to twist it hard, because that can break the pins out of the aperture blades. If the aperture is sticky, you need to clean the blades. You can usually do that by removing the lens and taking off the front and rear elements, and at the very minimum you can clean off the lenses, the aperture blades, with solvent, and then at least you can operate the aperture without breaking it or destroying it. The best thing to do is, of course, take it apart and overhaul it, but a tin-bladed aperture is a little bit difficult for someone who doesn't know what they're doing to repair. It's kind of difficult to clean the blades individually, lay them back in the precise position correctly, index the right way, and then put the retaining plate and all that. It's kind of a job which I don't like to do. But if you do get one of these and it's in good condition, it's really wonderful lens. The camera is wonderful too if you find one in working condition. And unfortunately, this one isn't in working condition. That's why it was in my toolbox. The shutter on this camera is jammed. I've got to take it apart and figure out what exactly is wrong with it. I haven't really had time to mess with this thing because I have a list of other cameras which I'm working on, and I always have a backlog of orders from people who have bought cameras from me. So if I can find some kind of quiet time where I can spend maybe 3 or 4 hours on this, hopefully I can get it going again. Otherwise, it's probably just going to sit in my toolbox for who knows how much longer. So these are quite a cool camera. If you have one of these cameras in working order, it's a really good shooter. I've had 2 of these before, a regular Pentamatic and a Pentamatic S, and I found them to be really smooth operating cameras, well balanced with a good viewfinder. And the earlier ones I had the different lens. They didn't have the Yashica Zunao lens. They had the regular Yashica lens, which aren't built, I guess, to the same quality as this one, even though they were quite excellent lenses, and I got good photographs out of them. I really want to see what I can do with this lens, and I wish this camera was in working order so I could go out and shoot a couple of rolls and see what people are talking about. Because in Japan, this lens has quite a good reputation among the, I guess, old school photographers. And of course, Zunao lenses here in Japan, one like this is probably worth, if you have a good one, maybe $300 or $400 here, and the faster ones are worth maybe 10 to 20 times that kind of money. Hopefully one day I can go out and get this, or at least get a working body where I can, go ahead and try out this lens. But anyway, that's it for my video today. I'll be posting another video the day after tomorrow. I had to do some unexpected traveling recently, so I had to shoot a few videos in advance. This is one of them, so please stay tuned. In a couple of days I'll have another video released. If you want to see my videos as they come out, I plan to be making a lot more of them. Please subscribe. I'm trying to grow this channel and get more people interested in film photography and vintage Japanese cameras. If you'd like to help, please click the like button. That would help a lot here. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.